As I said before, overall dialogue therapy is considered a short-term, anxiety-provoking psychoanalytic psychotherapy. So that's it's called STAP, short-term anxiety-provoking psychotherapy. And it's short-term because it's a limited number of sessions. In the co-therapist model, 7 sessions total, unless there's an unusual problem. And in the solo therapist model, 13 sessions total. It's considered anxiety-provoking because the therapy is set up in a way that actually keeps conflict in the room, challenges the two people in working with each other in a way that will definitely bring out their tendencies to make an enemy of each other, and their tendencies towards creating projective identification, that is, creating an unconscious template that they're going to try to control in the other person. So that provokes anxiety in the session. It makes the sessions difficult sometimes for the therapist to manage, because one role that the therapist has, and if it's a co-therapist model, this is easier than if it's a single therapist. In dialogue therapy, we do not let people attack each other. We feel that that's very destructive. We don't let people just throw whatever they want to at the partner. Once dialogue therapy gets underway, we'll stop you. We'll say, so instead of saying that, let's try it this way, and have you try it in a way that is more consistent with the actual creating of a mindful space for your partner. So the way the therapy is set up is to be challenging, to be short-term, and also to require the therapist to be kind of police as well as therapist. And consequently, it's emotionally exhausting. It's not easy therapy to do. So as a therapist, it's always been the cutting edge of my practice to work with couples, because I have to work with my own feelings and my own associations without actually intervening much on the level that I would in individual therapy, which is where I would stand back and maybe reflect on something. I'm really on the spot to respond immediately and quickly and accurately. So as the therapist in dialogue therapy, in those time-limited sessions, I'm going to be doing various kinds of roles, and so I'm going to talk about those roles. At the beginning, for the first 3 hours, it's evaluation, and that means that the therapist is going to have the couple go through various activities. Either single therapist or 2 therapists ask the couple to talk to each other about their reasons for being there. Then there's an evaluation with 6 questions, and then there's working with the 6 questions in the session, and then there's something that we call a relational or empathic interview, which is the history of relationship in each one of the individuals' lives, starting with the relationship that's in the room. And so if it's a 2-therapist model, each therapist has a partner, and that is the one that therapist interviews. And while, say, I might be interviewing the woman, the man might be sitting behind her taking notes. If it's a heterosexual relationship, my co-therapist is sitting behind me taking notes. If I am the solo therapist, I have to take my own notes while I'm doing the interview. And in that initial interview, I'm trying to find and really make clear the patterns that have occurred in that client that have resulted in the pain that's being created in that relationship, in the couple relationship. In other words, pretty quickly, I want to get to what is it that provokes this person to create an enemy of this sort with this other person. And to be able to see it, and then to be able to speak about it, to say, so I can see that your mother who was in bed most of the time when you came home from school was really absent and neglectful. And so you get very anxious when your partner seems to be neglecting you in the same way. And I have to be able to say that quickly because I've got 1 hour to find that sort of pot of gold and to say it to the client in a way that's really convincing. Most of the time in individual therapy, we have a longer time, but with couples, the dynamics are so clear that they come to the surface pretty quickly. So in the evaluation, the beginning of dialogue therapy, the therapist is a diagnostician, the therapist is an interviewer. Also, if it's a two-therapist model, the therapists reflect back and forth. We do something called a reflecting team. We talk to each other about the couple, and we talk frankly and authentically. We say things like, well, this couple actually is pretty aggressive in their communication. And it's going to be difficult to work with this. Or we'll say, they speak softly to each other, but they really don't talk about the truth very much. So the therapists also talk about the couple in the evaluation. At the end of the first 3 hours of evaluation, or if it's the solo model at the end of each hour, there is something called a wrap-up, where the two therapists or the therapist sit with the members of the couple and say, okay, here's what we discovered in this meeting. This and this and this. Do you understand it? Have any questions? And then there's usually a handout that we give to the couple as well. So in the first meeting, which is the evaluation, or the first 3 meetings, we conclude by saying, you're a good candidate for dialogue therapy. Or, dialogue therapy really wouldn't work with you guys because there's too much violence and you're going to have to get that addressed first. So there are some aspects of the diagnostic evaluation interview that could result in people not coming to dialogue therapy. Most of the time, people do qualify, let's say. 2 things that make it difficult would be active violence really is contraindicated to do dialogue therapy, or an active addiction that's untreated, contraindicated. Because again, remember, this is an anxiety-provoking experience. People coming out of it will be more agitated, at least for a while. So after the evaluation piece is over, then you have the first actual session of dialogue therapy, and we call it working on a conflict. And at the beginning of that meeting, we begin each one of the meetings by saying to the couple, we'd like you to talk about what you want to focus on today. So again, the couple makes the decision together about what the focus will be. Sometimes if they ask our guidance, or my guidance, if it's just me by myself, I say, it's a good idea to choose something that's causing you difficulty right now, rather than something that happened a year ago. However, if you, suffered a betrayal a year ago, that may still be causing you problems right now. So the couple comes up with the thing they want to talk about, and then the therapist may, if they're the co-therapist team, they might reflect back and forth about what they've heard and what they see. If it's the single therapist, then we begin the process of dialogue therapy itself. And what that consists of at first is a lot of the therapist stepping in as alter ego. If it's co-therapists, they do that with each one of the partners. If there's a solo therapist, they'll be switching back and forth between the chairs beside each one of the partners. Again, remembering this is a psychodrama model. This is meant to be dramatic, and so it does require the therapist, the solo therapist, acting again from both partners. Functioning as alter ego, what I will try to do is I will try to say in an I statement, the sort of speaking for yourself, what the client might be implying but not saying. For example, maybe the person is saying something like, I think I really don't want to work so hard at making money. And then maybe as alter ego, I would say, I feel unfairly treated in regard to finances or something. And then I might check with the client and say, what is it that you're feeling unfairly treated about? And actually, feeling unfairly treated is really what anger is. Anger is that sense, I'm being treated unfairly here. I might bring out the word anger, or I might not, depending. Anyway, so as alter ego at the beginning, I'm checking a lot with the client. I'm trying to bring out that statement in an I statement format without accusing the partner of anything. And then the other partner has to paraphrase. They will usually need help in paraphrasing. And so again, the therapist will usually try the paraphrase at first, because again, paraphrasing is this high-level skill in which you're trying to step into the other person's shoes. Usually when people begin paraphrasing, when they're very activated, they find a way of accusing the partner even in the paraphrase. And so back and forth statements of, here's what's going on for me, paraphrasing, here's what I understand. On the issue of conflict, eventually something comes out of that is either a doable negotiation for the two people, or it's not, in which case, if it's not, it's usually because of the projective identification of the pain and so on. The therapist at that point might interview an individual, sort of look more deeply into it. What is it that makes it so difficult for you to wash the dishes after dinner? What is that? What's going on for you? The partner's listening at that point. If there's a co-therapist, the co-therapist is taking notes. So the back and forth in that first meeting is around understanding how this projective identification creates pain, also beginning to teach the skills of dialogue, and then helping the paraphrasing move along, helping the individuals paraphrase. By the end of that meeting, we usually have a clearer picture of how the typical habit patterns have created pain in this couple. And we give another handout at that point, which is the difference between idealization and love, and how idealization distorts our views of what we want in a relationship, of being a witness, of being witnessed, and how love returns a sense of reality to that. So then in the co-therapist model, that first meeting is 2 hours. In the solo therapist, it's a 1 hour meeting. In the co-therapist model, the couple meets just once a month. So they'll come back for dialogue therapy, and they'll go on working with the method of actually being able to dialogue while being emotionally activated. At some point, we do something else, which is called a role reversal. That comes also from psychodrama, and it builds empathy with the partners, and basically it's the therapist interviewing the partner as though that were the other person, the other partner. So if in the case of a heterosexual couple, interviewing the man, and as though he were the woman, using the woman's name and asking him to really step into her shoes and to see the world from her perspective. It takes a lot of skill. That occurs well into the course of dialogue therapy, either in the third or the fourth meeting. By the time we get to the end of the dialogue therapy sessions, before we take the break for the follow-up, the couple themselves are using these skills. The therapists are not doing much. They're watching it. They're talking sometimes to each other about the things they see in the couple, but they're really insisting on the couple being able to use the skills of dialogue, and also to each individual being able to manage and understand how projective identification has infected his or her view and response to the partner. Sometimes that involves referring people to individual therapy too, because sometimes they really cannot manage the material, which might be from traumatic abuse, it might be from other kinds of trauma, or it might be from a family system that they haven't even really thought about ever. So sometimes individual psychotherapy gets recommended to a member, or sometimes both members of the couple. So at the end of the course of dialogue therapy, before the follow-up, we expect that partners can use the skills in a basic way that shows a certain degree of mindfulness. And here's where I want to kind of bring in the issue of mindfulness and of Buddhism.